welcome to the new how-to videos. Today we're talking about choosing a javelin. So the first thing to say, we often get people ask us for a javelin based on the colour of the paint or based on the price. And these we would recommend are absolutely not the factors that you should be looking for. There are various different ways of rating javelins depending on the different manufacturers. So I shall talk a little bit about what those systems are, why they matter, and then how the different manufacturer systems work. So we've got here a range of Nordic javelins, Nemeth javelins, and OTE javelins. But these principles are true for pretty much any brand of javelin, be that Polanic or any other. We've got distance ratings, where a javelin would be rated by 30 metre, 40 metre, 50 metre, 60 metre, etc. We have flex ratings, which is anywhere between 5 and 13, 4 and 13, and that is worked out by placing the javelin on two flat surfaces with a gap in the middle and hanging a weight on the centre of the javelin and seeing how much movement there is in the javelin. So it literally is how much that javelin flexes. The higher the rating, the softer the javelin, the lower the rating, the stiffer the javelin. So why does it matter? Flex rating and distance rating are fundamentally worked out in the same way, they're just presented differently. So for example, a 30 metre rated javelin would be something like a 13, 12, 11 flex rating. 40 metre javelin would be something like an 11 to 9 and so on, so that your top rated javelins for the 80 metres, 90 metres for the 800 grams are going to be in flex ratings of less than 7, so somewhere between 4.5 to 6.5, 7 is those distance ratings. So you can think of those two synonymously, use whichever one makes more sense to you or whichever one your particular preferred manufacturer uses. Why does it matter? So there's two reasons. Firstly, when you're throwing a javelin, you are releasing the javelin where it's point on. When you release the javelin, you're throwing it end on into the air. And the air resistance that comes back on that javelin is going to be different depending on the exact angle of the release of the javelin. So if you are highly technically skilled and you can get the javelin released in a very straight, clean release, there is going to be less wind resistance as the nose of the javelin cuts through the air. If you are not so technically advanced, and that might be as a very developed thrower but with a more power-based technique, or it may be because you're more of a beginner or intermediate thrower, then the air force on the javelin pushes further down the shaft, creating more power and kickback, shock, to come through the shaft of the javelin, which then enters the thrower's arm, into their elbow and shoulder. So if a developing thrower or a less technically proficient thrower throws too stiff a javelin, there is a far greater risk of injury in the arm, the shoulder, the elbow, and we see really tragic stories of extremely promising throwers with their careers cut short because they've used too stiff a javelin too early on in their throwing career. Second reason is for aerodynamics. You'll see that there is a paraboloid, an arc, which is natural for that javelin. And that is because the javelin requires a certain distance to turn nose down. Obviously, if a javelin lands tail down, then it's a no throw and doesn't count towards your results. So a distance rated javelin of 80 metres, for example, requires 60 metres distance in order to turn nose down. So if a thrower who's throwing 50 metres throws an 80 metre javelin, it will fall out of the sky tail down because it hasn't got enough momentum to get past the top of the arc of flight. So a javelin with a shorter distance rating or a higher flex number would have the centre of gravity further towards the tip of the javelin, whereas a javelin which needs to go further and therefore has a longer distance to travel before it turns would have the centre of gravity further towards the centre of the javelin. let's have a look at some of the rating systems that each of the manufacturers uses. So over on this side we have the OTE. So you can see here we have an OTE competition javelin, which is 70 metre rated, and a special headwind javelin, which is 50 metre rated. And that is the same system that is used by OTE and also by Nemeth. Here again we've got a Nemeth Classic, which is 80 metre rated, and a Nemeth Standard, which is 40 metre rated. Visibly not a huge amount of difference other than the paintwork, but inside there are going to be those differences we've talked about the flex of the javelin, and also the centre of gravity of the javelin is going to be different between those ranges. These are the Nordic ranges. So you can see here these three are the older Nordic range, and you can see that we have a Carbon Xena, which is a 5.6, a Diana Classic, which is a 7.7, and a Viking, which is 11.1. So your Viking is a really good sort of beginner to improver javelin. It's got the flex rating of the 11.1, which means it's obviously softer, less likely to cause injury, and it's going to turn really well to land point down. Then you've got the Diana Classic, about 7.7 flex, really good for top level club throwers, and also for those elites as well. The Diana can absolutely be brought up to an elite standard because it's got that flex of 7.7. And then you've got the Carbon Xena, which is the 5.6 flex, which is obviously going to be an extremely technical javelin. So if you're an elite thrower that has an exceptionally good release technique, you're really getting that nose perfectly into the flight every time, then the Xena is going to be a great option for you with that height, with that extremely stiff responsiveness. The newer Nordic javelins, so the Valhalla and the Valkyrie, and the other javelins are moving over to this system, have this circle system, which has only been introduced in 2020, 2021, and a lot of people are not accustomed to that yet. They have a variety of different circles. We have the expert, intermediate, beginner circle. So this Valhalla medium is 60% expert, 30% intermediate and 10% beginner. I would suggest that it's a 0% beginner javelin because this is a very stiff rated javelin, but it really does tell you that it's, you know, an expert elite level javelin. And then we have three more circles, which is balance, stiffness and aerodynamics. So those are going to tell you about your arc. So a javelin which has got a 5 aerodynamics is going to have a longer arc and a longer turning point. It's going to need to be thrown further before it lands nose down. And if you had one which was on a 3 maybe for the aerodynamics, it's going to have a shorter distance rating. Same with the stiffness. This has got a stiffness of 4, and you're going to be looking at a 4 or a 5. Is that more expert level of stiffness once you've developed your technique and you're not going to damage your shoulder and your elbow? You're looking for lower numbers for beginner implements and intermediate implements. And your balance is 5, so that's talking about your centre of gravity. The next thing that I'd like to just talk about briefly is the tip of the javelin. So as you can see, the tips are broadly in 2 categories. So we have a selection of javelins which have got very pointed, sharp noses, and we have a selection of javelins which have a blunter tip and nose to them. There are 2 ways of looking at this. Generally speaking, the shorter distance ratings, the intermediate and beginner javelins, have got the pointier, sharper noses. And when you get up to the elite level javelins, you have a choice. And on that basis, broadly speaking again, a sharp tip is seen to be more of a headwind javelin, and a blunt tip is seen to be more of a tailwind or all-round javelin. So when you're a beginner, the tip really doesn't matter. Intermediate, the tip will effectively be what the tip is. When you get into the upper levels, then you will start to choose, and some would have multiple javelins for different wind conditions because those tips really make a difference in the wind conditions. So for example, on the OTE special javelin here we have a 50 metre. This is a sharp tip, but and they know it as a headwind javelin. You can equally go for a 50 metre tailwind javelin. So that is, broadly speaking, your difference in your tips. How are you going to choose a javelin? I hope that this has been useful for you. General rules are: choose a javelin which is no more than 10 metres higher rated than you're currently throwing. So if you're throwing 45 metres, purchase a 50 metre javelin, or something in the region of a 8-9 flex. If you suddenly have an amazing season and you're throwing 55 metres, a 50 metre javelin is going to fly 50 metres if you throw it well. They don't hit a wall and drop out of the sky. But if you were to go for a 60 metre javelin when you're currently throwing 45 metres, the likelihood is A, more prone to injury, B, it will land tail down, and you won't make that progression in your throwing. The second thing to remember is your coach. Your coach is the person that knows you best. They know your release technique, they see how you throw, and they can give you advice on which javelin is best for you. If you do not have access to a good coach, then you can send us a video clip of your throwing, ideally a couple of clips from different angles, and we can ask some of the UK's top coaches, also in the other throws events, not just javelin, for some advice on some options of which 2 or 3 javelins or implements may be the best for you. So always ask your coach or our coach for advice. I hope this has been really useful. Do get in touch if you've got any problems, and enjoy your throwing.